Greetings, Darklings, from across the interweb. It is once again I, the Duchess, Precious Ken, here for the Sounds and Shadows podcast. And we have an exciting one today. This is going to be a lot of fun. But as always, I like to do a shout out in the beginning. And I didn't have anything new that came in that was sent, but there was a Detroit band that I am a fan of, Wandering Whispers, that has a new single out called Empathy for the Devil that I want to recommend to everybody to check out. Just very cool, like raw, skinny puppy noise, industrial, and just amazing stuff. Really, really cool. So if you have not checked that out yet, we've shared it on the page before. Check out Wandering Whispers. Okay. The other thing I will give a shout out to here is I had an interview last night, did two in 1 week. I know, what am I doing to myself? But of the wonderful band Creux Lies out of Sacramento, California. It was awesome. So be ready to look for that. I guess it'll probably come out shortly before this interview. But cool t-shirt here, and just, I mean, to me, like up there with Actors, Twin Tribes, Vision Video, some of the biggest in the new wave of goth music. So check that out. Now, I have an exciting guest here. And speaking of Vision Video, from over in Atlanta, Georgia, I'm going to interview today with the band Now After Nothing. And Matt is going to join me. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ken, for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited, and I've been trying to have more of these interviews instead of, I don't know, like bands that I know really really well, people that I wasn't as familiar with, and got to dive into your music a bit this week, which was really really great, and I really enjoyed it. I think one
Thank
of the
you.
things that stood out, it kind of reminds me a little bit of another Detroit band I'm a big fan of, called Vazum. And one of the reasons why is in the dark wave, like new wave, goth scene, it's a lot of 80s emulation, I would say. You hear a lot of that flavor in it. But when I hear your music, I am instead reminded of 90s kind of grungy alternative mixed with that dark wave sound, and kind of blended in, having more of a 90s flavor. And it just makes it feel really, really fresh and cool. I hear vibes of Filter and Pixies and, bass driven things like that. So why don't you start out telling me, Matt, and our viewers here, a little bit about your musical history and how this project came about?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I certainly have my 90s influences. And it was bands like, and some of these bands, probably came out before then. Like, I mean, I'm a big Sonic Youth fan. I'm a big My Bloody Valentine fan.
Yeah,
But these were bands that I discovered in the 90s. But it was also like, Nine Inch Nails and, like you said, Filter and things like that.
sure.
That kind of, were what were being played at the time, that were
Yeah.
certainly kind of permeating me a little bit. I did gravitate, I gravitated more towards like, The Cure and Sisters of Mercy and Sonic Youth and Bauhaus and a lot of those 80s bands, but I think it's kind of unmistakable. You hear a lot of that 90s influence in a lot of what I do. And that's from bands like Curve and Garbage and
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff that Gary Newman was doing in the 90s. He kind of had his rebirth, so to speak. That stuff really just killed me. It was so good.
Yeah. I think what was really distinct for me is your bass sound, like, kind of what I think of like that 80s or, Duran Duran, or, where it's very clear, very precise, where your bass growls. It's a tube amp with a broken wire, kind of like teeth gnashing wolf kind of sound to your bass. But then it has a lot of, like you said, those cleaner dark wave goth elements, but it's just unmistakable while it's happening. This bass sound that, is kind of out of place on it. And it makes me drawn into it and kind of has this haunted flavor as a result.
Yeah, thank you. I, certainly worked. I slaved over the bass tone quite a bit. I've been a bass player for years and had played. I've always done distorted bass and whatnot. And when I was doing Now After Nothing, I kind of I decided to go with a different. Like I kind of squashed my old setup and went for something new because I wanted to get more growl, but I didn't want to, a lot of times you put on a distortion on a bass and then you lose the low end, and
Yeah.
so I spent a lot of time really kind of honing in on what was going to give me the sound that I really always wanted, and so I got rid of the Boss distortion and started using some Sans Amp stuff, which I love. And then from there was, on the album, you hear, I've got a direct signal and I've got three different mics on my cab.
It's funny. Usually, it's way later in the interview that I dive into the gear nerd stuff because it's
Right.
so
Okay.
not me. I like giving that to my fans and letting, artists explain so fans can hear where that sound came from. But I love that we just jumped right into gear nerd right off the bat, which
Yeah,
also is a very shoegaze thing to do.
it is, right? And I'm a big gear nerd myself, I have to admit. I'm not like super gear nerd in terms of like, I can't tell you, what producer used this exact
Sure.
microphone, and I'm that's so, I was never that guy, but I do have a background in audio engineering, so that was enough for me to really know what I was striving for and gave me a basis for how to find it.
When you say you had a background in audio engineering, was that something you went to school for, or was it something you just kind of like we all had to, hey, it turns out you don't have to pay for $400 an hour studio time because we can, just have a laptop now.
Yeah, well, and this was I'm trying to think of the exact time. So I had just finished my undergrad degree, which was in video production and management, and
Ooh.
I had done that in South Florida. And my graduation present was actually more schooling. It was a 2 month kind of crash course in audio engineering
Ooh.
at the recording workshop in Chillicothe, Ohio. And it was like the best 2 months of my life. It was just living, breathing, sleeping audio and bands and recording. And I went into it really with the perspective of I just wanted to learn how to do it so that as a songwriter, I could get get to where I wanted to be, sound
Yeah,
wise. I never had aspirations of being an actual like recording engineer as much as I just wanted to know how to get from A to B.
sure.
And that really like, sparked my love of being in the studio and, that kind of thing.
Or you just threw me for a loop there because you mentioned Chillicothe, Ohio. And there is only one other human that I've ever known from Chillicothe, and it's a
Mm.
gentleman that I work with. And so I have to wonder, what's the scene in Chillicothe, Ohio? Because all I ever picture him listening to would be like Leonard Skinner on repeat.
And I don't know what it's like now, but at the time, and I assume it's probably not that much different. At the time, there was absolutely nothing happening in Chillicothe, Ohio, other than this recording school.
Wow. Okay.
Um,
Cool.
and this is, like this is before cell phones and things like that, where you
Yeah.
could really like, access the outside world, the way you can now. And I imagine for those of us who were there in the pre kind of, constant connection era that we're in now, I would have to imagine we got a lot more out of it because we had no distractions.
Sure.
And it was great, like we just, like I said, like we lived it for 2 months straight. It was great. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's no scene in Chillicothe.
I think there is something to be said for that too. That like I talked about that with Creux Lies last night, and the idea that back then when you were paying $400 an hour for studio time or something, there was this urgency because
Mm-hmm.
we were poor and you maybe could afford like 4 hours today or a couple hours today. So you needed to get that take. You needed to get it right the first time and hope it came out. Whereas now we're just like, hey, why don't we just play 37 overlapping guitar tracks and see what comes out in the wash
See what, yeah,
afterwards?
yeah, exactly. And I started out as a drummer, and I mean, I remember the days of recording, before computers and flying
Especially
in
drums.
and nudging, and yeah, exactly. My bandmates, they could punch in, and I did not have that luxury.
Right.
It's, like I listened to the stuff I recorded back then, and you can definitely hear the tempo fluctuations.
So after that, Chillicothe, you
Yeah.
are in Atlanta now, which
Mm,
to me has a very, very cool scene. I went out there a couple years ago to visit Dusty from Vision Video
mm.
for the festival that he did over there in Savannah. He did it again this year too, but very, very cool. And I was impressed by the scene there. And I talked to my friend Dom, that is DJ there.
I know Dom well.
And yeah, tell me a little bit about what the scene is like there in Atlanta and maybe how that kind of shapes the flavor of your sound.
Well, the funny thing is, so now after nothing is kind of a return to music for me. I had, I had broken up my previous band, and at that point, I needed a break. I had, been doing the band thing my entire life, and was
When
always
you say
like,
you had broken up the band, do you mean it in like a Fleetwood Mac sense or?
well, not that debaucherous,
Okay,
unfortunately.
okay.
It was not that interesting. It just came down to,
It
everyone
wasn't
was,
working.
yeah, everyone was sick of each other, I think. Um, but yeah, when that band had split up, and I just, had been going nonstop as the principal songwriter for the bands I had been in, as the kind of the de facto leader, manager kind of person, or co-manager, as in some cases. I just needed a break, and then I went to grad school, just to kind of clear my head.
Yeah.
And at that point, I started to really, I mean, I was out of the scene completely for a number of years. And then when I got to the point when I realized, like, this sucks, I'm really miserable. I have no, I need to reconnect with this side of myself.
Sure.
So that's when I, started writing again for Now After, what would become Now After Nothing.
When was this
And
approximately when you were kind of getting back into the scene?
um, I started writing for Now After Nothing in like 2018, I think.
Yeah, so that was kind of to me like about the time we started to have a real, I don't know, goth renaissance scene resurgency.
Yeah, completely. And what was really cool is that once I started getting back out there and, like seeing people that I hadn't seen for, years, and
Sure.
um, getting to reacquaint myself with the Atlanta scene, I was so happily surprised. It was a different scene. It was a better scene. It was a bigger scene. It was a scene with a lot less drama.
Yeah.
I don't know if just because everyone's older and wiser, probably not. I don't know, but
I was going to say
um,
sometimes it feels like there's less drama because you're in your 30s and 40s,
yeah,
and maybe it was just that everybody was like that when they're in their 20s, but also what you're saying could be true too.
yeah, yeah, probably a bit of both, I'm sure. But yeah, like once I started kind of, getting back out there and, meeting people again, and talking to people, and, like reacquainting with old friends and whatnot. Yeah, that's what, when it really kind of hit me, I was like, wow, we really do have a good scene here. I
Yeah,
wouldn't have said the same thing, just 5, 10 years prior.
sure.
It just seemed a lot more fragmented back then. But so in terms of, I don't know that it necessarily had an influence on me as much as, because I was very much working on Now After Nothing in like my bubble, you know.
Sure.
Um, and it wasn't until I was, starting to look for people to play with and all that stuff that I got out there. And the songs had mostly been written, but I was so happily surprised by, the people I was meeting, and just how we have like probably at least one weekend or one night a week. There's some sort of, different dance night
Sure.
happening.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of people in the scene that are, promoting their events, and whether it's dance nights and bands, and yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I was real impressed with that. Like, after leaving Savannah there and staying for a few nights over in Atlanta, that yeah, there was kind of something going on almost every night. So I
Yeah.
was real blown away by that. That was very, very cool, the scene there. Um, so if it really wasn't kind of a place, what was, I don't know, your kind of inspiration on this EP? Was there, whether it was something going on in the world, whether it was something going on in your life, what did you draw from that kind of made its way into the tone or the theme of this EP?
Yeah, I think I had mentioned before I was, after I split previous band up, and just, needed to get away from almost everything.
Yeah,
I had a lot of just, a lot of toxicity around me, that I had been dealing with, and that might be a bit of a strong word in some respects, um, but I mean, I had some things that I had to deal with on a personal level that were not easy, that were really challenging. Was going through a pretty severe depression, feeling very disconnected from, who I am as an artist and as an individual, like, just disconnected from my identity.
sure.
So that was a big inspiration, in a lot of these songs, just trying to, find a catharsis in the process of, of getting through what I needed to get through. And in terms of the toxicity, the year was this was about 2017, 2018. And, I, like everybody else that, has a heart, we,
Right.
we were really all struggling, just by the everyday barrage of what was happening, in our
Yeah,
political system, and, um, you know, just all that kind of stuff. And that was a big inspiration for me too. That's very like a song like "Criminal Feature," which, I sent, I think, sent you the video for.
yeah,
I mean, that's all about the state of, politics in America, the enmeshment of politics and religion, and, in America and everything. So it's a lot of things like that that really inspired me to.
sure. I think a lot of people were there, and it was frightening, and we're staring down the barrel of it again. It's, I don't
Yeah.
know, a very bizarre time when you think of all the other times in life, that Joe Strummer trained us for this. But like, I don't know, it's hard not to feel like it's even more divisive and more frightening now in a lot of ways. But I don't know, like, because there were a lot of other, I don't know, challenges that were more in the face to a lot of people that are important to me, women, friends that who knows what the future is going to hold. And I mean, yeah, the upside is sometimes that leads to some really transcendent great art, but at the same time, you can't take away from the actual real life human suffering people go through as a result of it.
Yeah. I mean, like I don't think anybody would, trade, the good art for human suffering.
Right.
I mean, it's a byproduct. Like, good art is a byproduct of that, which is unfortunate. But, I it's the way I've always viewed it is it's kind of like, everybody copes in their own individual way,
Sure.
like part of, and, like, even like the title "Artificial Ambivalence," the title of the EP,
Yeah.
it really, to me, it reflects like this, you know, a lot of helplessness, like the feelings of helplessness that a lot of people were feeling, psychologically kind of tricking yourself into like this artificial kind of ambivalence toward it, because your brain is, we if you just are thinking about it constantly nonstop, you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Right.
Um, so the entire climate around us really informed a lot of the EP.
No, I think that's really true. And I love that title and meant to ask you about it because it just, I don't know, I think it's just a clever and large concept. And I really, I don't know, like where it took my head when I stopped for a moment to think of it. And plus I just like alliteration.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's great. And as somebody who does a very silly goth band myself, I recognize and appreciate just what you said that it doesn't always have to be serious to still be dealing with dark things because I
Mm,
think that's what a lot of people forget or need is that I don't know, yeah, it is important to write artistic, meaningful songs, but it's also important to write bangers. You know, where we could hit the dance floor and I don't know, have 5 minutes to, like you said, shut our minds off
yeah.
from the reality of what's happening around us, which can be overwhelming.
100%. Absolutely. I mean, and that to me is part of like the what my graduate degree is in mental health counseling. And to me,
Wow.
that is just, that's the self care right there. Like it's okay to shut down and take a break and give yourself. It's not even. It's beyond okay. It's needed,
Yeah.
for everybody to keep our sanity in all this.
And I think a lot of us have turned, heck, maybe that's why there's so many bands now. It feels like as a music reviewer,
Yeah.
there's never been more bands where it's so hard for me to even keep up or keep track of them all. Um, that how much that's needed for people right now is some kind of a, I don't know, creative outlet to throw things at the wall because otherwise, I don't know, you've got that feeling buried inside.
Yeah, and I think it goes both ways too, right? Like it's us as artists needing to create and, you know, get that out of us and find, I think of it very relationally, like we have our relationships with our own songwriting and how that makes us feel and all that. And then the flip side of that is listeners.
Yeah.
Other people are looking for connection in any way they can right now. And that's
And a
very
lot of
important
times it
too.
was both. I mean, we all
Hmm.
kind of
Yeah.
started as a young, impressionable
Yeah.
person, whatever, hearing Pretty Hate Machine for the first time in your bedroom, sad because someone didn't love you anymore and thinking it was the end of the world and being like, now that guy, he gets me.
100%. Like, I think we've all had, those moments of sitting in our dark rooms with us with a CD, like one song on repeat,
Sure.
and it's it's because the song understands you,
Yeah.
you know, it gets you.
There are some universal truths that I think can only be experienced when words and music come together.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's something special and powerful about that.
I agree.
So tell me a little bit, you said that I mean this started out for you very much as a writing and a studio project. Do you ever go out and play out with Now After Nothing? And do you have anything coming up where people could go witness this?
Yeah, so we started our first live shows in just last year. We had a really great show with Curse Mackey and a Starry Night.
Curse
Um,
is a dear friend, wonderful, and has always been a huge supporter. So,
yeah, Chris is a great guy. We've become, good friends since. So that was our first show just last year. Since then, we've been a few different places. We've played with the band Alice, who
yeah, very cool band.
I can't say enough good things about. They're just phenomenal.
Yeah.
We've played with Glass Bells, another really cool band that's doing a lot of great stuff. And then we've got so these were like through like Atlanta, Savannah, Charleston,
Sure.
places like that. And I'm really excited because in about let's see, to in about like 16 days, we're opening up for Vision Video over at Masquerade here in Atlanta. So I'm like really excited about that
Have
because
you ever played with Dusty before or seen him play?
I've seen them play. Yeah, Dusty, we met. He actually DJ'd at the Glass Spells show. That it was us, Glass Spells, and Dusty came out and DJ'd. Had a great time, and he, I really dug what we were doing, which was cool. I've seen them before, and they're fantastic. Just I mean, just such a great approach to their songs, and I love that they're not, they don't take themselves seriously. Like he's,
But they also do talk about
but
really
but
serious message.
exactly, like he's got such a great message behind his songs. But he also can bring some levity to things,
Yeah.
and so yeah, they're fantastic. So we just kind of confirmed that show not that long ago, so I'm really excited about it.
I'm always just really impressed. We've got to open for a Vision Video before, and the way that Dusty appeals to young people, because goth music has traditionally always been that traditional, like based
Hmm.
in the past. If it's not the Sisters of Mercy, then it's shit,
Right, right.
and, not looking towards the next wave. And when I go out to Vision Video shows and see I'm the oldest person in the audience, and everybody else there is just hanging on his every word, and seeing young people excited about goth music, it gives me hope that this scene will be around in 10, 15 years.
Yeah,
Whereas I wondered if that was going to be true.
yeah, absolutely. It's nice to see, and I think and that's one thing we were talking about Atlanta before. Another thing that kind of pleasantly surprised me when I came back into the scene is I could see a resurgence, and like there were younger people coming, out to the same, all the different dance nights and shows and things like that. When we did the Glass Spells show, I mean, there was a lot of young kids that came out to see them, which was great. And got to be exposed to us as well. So yeah, it's really cool. It's nice to see it all kind of come full circle in that way.
So, as somebody who, kind of like you said, is very used to the studio and obviously puts a importance on songwriting and the music that you're going to put out before you take it to the stage, what do you bring that's different? Because to me, that's always really, really important. That, if I go out and hear a great band, but it's like I just hit play on the CD and I could have sat in my living room and got this same thing. I want to hear, I don't know, a little different flavor when I see it live. What is it that you try and bring to your live show that's unique to fans to give them a little extra experience?
Yeah, I think we have. I'm a bit of a purist in that I grew up playing, especially as someone who started out as a drummer. Like I love live drums. There's just nothing that beats live drums. At a club when you can really when you feel the bass drum, like just kind of punching you in the gut. I love that, and I think I bring a lot of like that kind of. I I guess it's somewhat old school at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
it almost feels weird to say it, but drums are live drums are an old school thing. But um, I'm a purist in the instrumentation of it, and I think that that's one thing that we definitely bring to our live show. Is like
Yeah.
I try to. My goal with the band was to really not have a bunch of tapes and things like that. And
Right.
not that there's anything wrong with that. Like
Sure.
I get it, especially, I very easily could have done now. I mean, Now After Nothing was actually just going to be a solo record.
Yeah.
And I had no intention when I started it of, playing live again. And I could see now that, had I maybe gone a different direction with it, I very well could have gotten up there just myself and, um, done it that way. And I love the bands that do it that way. I think that's, it's really cool that they can do it without having to rely on other people.
Sure.
It's not like musicians are known for being flaky or anything. Um, but but the recording geek in me I love miking up drums. I love miking up cabinets. I love, doing that thing. And because of that and my recording background, I think I really try to take the same approach to a live setting where it's not just, kind of like you said, running a CD in the background. And, I'm able to take some of the things that we did do on the EP and really kind of bring it to life and expound upon it, with a live guitar and, that kind of thing that,
I
not
really like
everyone's
hearing
doing
you
these days.
describe it. It almost sounds like a ritual when you talk about it. Like, I have to just go into the room and I have to set up those mics and I have to get the alignment right. And I have to, it feels to me like, you're kind of mad scientist on it or wizard almost in the light in your eyes when you describe this kind of process and ritual of it. And I think going back to something you said, right, there's nothing wrong with, having backing tracks and drum machines, but I think that's again what makes your sound to me sound very 90s and very fresh. Part of that is that the drum sounds that you're getting. And I think a lot of the reason more and more bands aren't doing it is economics.
Oh,
It's
what?
you need a bigger van. I mean, when we go, the three of us on the road, our entire loadout, we don't have amps, we don't have drums, we have all in-ear monitors. Our whole loadout fits in the trunk of a Subaru Outback.
Nice.
And I've never had that at any other time in my life, and I love it. My 47-year-old back really loves it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But
And
I like that you're saying this is our identity. It's important to us. And so even though maybe that would be easier, that's not who I want to say I am to fans. I want to do this other thing because it matters to me.
yeah, it does matter to me, like that's part of the art, that I create is doing it that way. And look, I mean, I'm not hypocritical. I mean, I do have like this, we don't have a synth player and I run the
Sure.
backing tracks on synths. I have some backing uh like vocal effects that are, that come in and out,
Yeah.
and things like that. I mean, I'm singing live, of course, but yeah, I mean, like I'm not like unreasonable about it. And like we had to do a show without our drummer before, so
Sure.
I piped in the drums and took all the live drum tracks and bounced them down. And I mean, you do what you got to do, right? And I think the like you said, the economics of it, you
Especially
know,
if you're touring. It's one thing, when you're kind of like us, kind of part-time, showing up to do a show here and now. But if you're really, I don't know, like Vision Video or actors where you're going like world tours or something, God, it gets to add in the extra part of bringing all those drums with you is a whole different thing for
it
the
is.
money you have to put away.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we're such a new band that it's really hard actually.
Yeah,
I mean, I was talking to a promoter not that long ago, and she was saying how there's some bands that they won't allow an opening act to have live drums. And I mean I posted something about this. I don't know if you remember in the Sounds and Shadows forum a while
oh,
back. And a lot of people were like, well, that's bullshit, and then there were other people that were like, look, like we're one of those bands and this is why we do it because of,
sure. I
X,
get it.
Y,
I
X,
see
Y,
from
Z.
both sides of that, but it is hard to compete with that kind of energy.
It is. And I get that. I think, the bummer of it for, like a young band like us is it kind of limits some of our opportunities
Right.
maybe. But I mean, I am working on, different configurations of live now after nothing, right?
Sure.
If I had to do it with it, like we've had to do it without a drummer, so we did it. We at one point, like I'm the bass player and our guitar player wasn't able to make it, so I had to like relearn all these guitar parts and push the bass tracks on our keyboard tracks. I
Yeah.
mean, I'll always do what I have to do just because I love performing. And I don't ever want to turn down a gig because someone can't do it or whatever
Right.
the case may be. So I'm not like that much of a purist. Maybe maybe like when we reach a bit of a higher level, maybe
Sure.
we'll have a little more clout that we can kind of, be a bit more purist about it.
Sure.
But like you do what you got to do, and I get why people are out there by themselves because you can actually make a living doing it. In some cases, versus I mean, I can't get three guys on the road right now that,
Right. Getting a hotel for everybody.
yeah,
I
like
mean, all of that stuff. The more people
as
you
an
have, the more
yeah,
complicated it is.
and the more as an opening act, not
Right.
making enough money to do it. So
Yeah.
we all do what we have to do.
So I got a couple more things that I want to ask about, but another one, just talking to you, this has been really great and kind of hearing about your education history and everything. Tell me something that isn't music that inspires you and maybe, in making your music, but rather it's, I don't know, hobbies, movies, books, something like that outside that you feel goes into your collective consciousness when you're writing for Now After Nothing.
Ooh, so so much of so much of like my life even like when I'm reading books, it's like it's an autobiography of I just read Kathy Valentine's book from the Go-Go's. Like
Yeah,
I'm so music centric that it's hard to answer that question. But for I mean for better, I am a bit of well, I part of my day job is with a news and information platform, so I'm whether I like it or not, I'm very I try to stay up to date on what's happening. I almost have to
sure.
sometimes for my job.
Nothing could
Um,
be more goth and depressing than that.
right, exactly. So like it or not, I mean that's something that has, been a big influence on me.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, a lot of the news isn't, it's not always the, dog saves baby from drowning.
sure.
It's a lot of more of the negative stuff, which
Do
is
you have maybe a particular cause that's close to your heart? Like if you were going to do a charity compilation tomorrow that you were going to put together, what would be the type of thing that you'd want to do one for?
that is a great question, actually. And this actually is our meow after nothing kind of logo. This is the sticker, and then we have T-shirts.
Oh,
And my family is very involved in a Atlanta based charity called Lifeline Animal Project. And there's the Lifeline Animal Project has contracts with two of the largest counties in Atlanta, and they run their county shelters. And the mission is to end shelter euthanasia for healthy pets. So we're very involved. And I actually made the meow after nothing design. I didn't make it. I had a wonderful designer that had designed it. But I had had it made to make our t-shirts and whatnot, so that we could give a portion of the proceeds back to Lifeline Animal Project.
that's
Um,
awesome. Do you have kitties? I have four.
yeah, we have two. We have a dog and a cat. And I also have a son. And as much as I love, you know, my family and our
Sure.
pets and all that, it's a little much uh, for my introverted self.
A lot of
um,
activity at that. Well, trust me, yeah. I mean, like I said, I have four. When you have three cats, you're like a crazy cat person. When you go
uh,
to four, the difference between four and 27 is almost nothing. Like you have just
yeah,
given over to
yeah,
complete chaos at that point.
yeah. So I've had to put the limit on on that. So
Yes, for your sanity.
it's for my own sanity. I could not. It's a lot of energy that
Yeah.
is really hard for me.
Well, that's amazing. I love to hear that, and I can't wait to hear more. We should talk about that, and I'll make sure to put a link in it when we release the interview, so that
Awesome.
people can find the charity, because that is one very near and dear to our hearts as well.
Oh, that's
Um,
excellent.
so coming up here towards the end, one of the things I always like to ask is to hear from an artist, what are some of the things that you're listening to and are inspiring you? And we've talked about a couple bands during the course of this, but do you have a couple, and especially maybe if you've got some that I don't know about over in Georgia? I always like to hear kind of local stuff, but that you think people should check out and pay attention to.
Yeah. I one band that I'm really getting into a lot, I mentioned before, was Alice. I was familiar with them somewhat, going into the show with them, but I had never seen them live before. And catching them, I mean, if you've never seen Alice
That's
live,
the way
just
to do it for Alice for sure. They're one of those bands that they're a totally different experience when you see them live.
yeah, I mean, I like I said, I just can't say enough good things about them. They're just really fantastic. So I've really been getting into like their back catalog and kind of discovering them,
Yeah.
which has been really cool. I don't know if you remember a band called, and I think I mentioned Curve earlier.
Yeah.
Curve is like I've been on a really big Curve kick lately. Um, I mean, just talk about a band that really got it right,
Yeah.
and never got the recognition that they deserved, to get.
Yeah, do you
Um,
know that's my wife Rachel is a big shoegaze person and that's one of her all-time favorites. So
oh, excellent, yeah.
yeah,
So
we hear a lot of Curve around here.
yeah, Curve is great, and like that's one of the bands too that like I probably draw some inspiration from because or a fair amount of inspiration from. I mean, their sound, like their entire sound, like the configuration, the instruments, the electronic edge they have to them, the big washy guitars. I mean, I just love all of it, and it's has that like the right amount of like darkness to it.
Yeah.
It's just they're fantastic.
Now, do
Um,
you know the in our scene kind of the dark wave band Crying Vessel?
I'm not familiar, no.
All right, we're going to talk after the interview because
Okay.
there's a Curve crossover
Oh,
that
very cool.
I have to tell you about, but very cool band that I think you would really enjoy.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Yeah, so Curve is another band. Been kind of, big on Gary Newman lately as well. So
I
much of
just
this.
saw him on tour last year and still just killed it. Absolutely awesome.
Yeah, yeah, completely. I saw that same tour. It was so yeah, he's always fantastic. Yeah, so I've been listening to a lot of bands like that. Every like the Sisters of Mercy were just here in September, and at any time after a Sisters show, like all of a sudden I'm like, oh yes, I remember how great this band is, and so I always get on a Sisters kick.
And a lot of times a Sisters of Mercy show could be rolling the dice.
Yeah,
But this last tour, actually, Andrew, he sounded really, really good. And the whole
yeah.
band, I think, I don't know, was one of the better times live that I've seen them. So
I agree. It is a bit of a rolling the dice sometimes, but yeah, they sounded fantastic this tour. It was cool. Yeah, those are some bands that I'm really kind of getting into.
yeah. So um as we reach the end of the journey here, I always like to spin out to one of your songs so that people can really take it in, get an idea of your sound. We've talked about it and what it's all about. I know you mentioned Criminal Feature
Hmm.
earlier. Is there a particular track that if people are hearing you for the first time, this is the foot forward that I want to put that we can spin out to that people can get the vibe of what Now After Nothing is all about.
I mean, I think like Sick Fix is the first single that we had put out, and a lot of people really kind of dig that tune,
Yeah.
which has been, it was really exciting to have that as our lead single and to have such a great response to it. I think that song, kind of encompasses what we sound like. Fixation Fantasy is one of my favorite tunes. I mean, talk about like the gnarly bass tone.
Yeah, that's one of
Um,
the ones that I heard first where I was like, oh, this growl, where did that come from?
yeah.
Because
So
when
I
you
think,
hear, like I said, when I looked at first, it kind of, I think it categorized you guys under darkwave or something. So I have darkwave in my head, and all of a sudden that was the first thing I heard was the growl of that bass. I'm like, that doesn't compute with what I think of as darkwave, but I'm into it right now.
Well, and it's funny too because I like yeah, I was had the same conversation not that long ago too. Like I think darkwave is a broader umbrella than a lot of people give it
It
credit
is.
for.
It is.
You know, I mean, I think of, and I love bands like Switchblade Symphony, right? I mean,
Sure.
they were like one of the, they were to me such a kind of a crossover kind of dark wave band, and that they really,
Yeah.
brought in a lot of new wave instrumentation like that Susan was doing back in the day, and eventually into trip hop even. I mean, if you
Right.
think of the second album, but like all of that to me feels like dark. Like to me, I think of it as dark wave. So I don't know. Maybe my definition's a little, a little more, a little more broad than others.
I feel firmly anyway that genre is useful for if you like band A, you might like band B, and that's the end of what I care about genre.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, so Fixation Fantasy, I think, is shows a good a lot of the breadth of the band.
Yeah. Okay. Well, perfect. Well, then, for all of you out there in interweb land, this has been the interview with Now After Nothing, and we are going to be spinning out to Fixation Fantasy. So all of you out there, keep it dark, y'all. Good, good. Excellent.
Excellent. Yeah, man, this was a blast. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, for sure.
In the street, there's a strangled structure. Sign of time's false prophet destructor. And let's say it's a wreckage of days. Falling in for your criminal prey. The dead man is coming, a seminal creature with a tale of beginnings, a maniacal reacher. It's a lesson you get from the ignorant teacher when they sell you a story, a criminal feature. The soul sucker makes a claim of redemption. Traded for the independent exception.